The lake was a mirror, still as death, reflecting the dawn's faint glow and the weight of a secret I didn't yet know. I stood on the creaking dock, my borrowed fishing rod trembling in my hands, while Caleb, my neighbor of 3 years, knelt to untangle a line with a focus that felt too heavy for the task. His glance, sharp, unguarded, like he'd been waiting for this moment his whole life, pierced me, and I swear the world tilted. My name's Ethan Carter, 24, a graphic designer who'd fled Chicago's noise for the quiet of Willow Creek, Michigan. I'd traded skyscrapers for pine trees, hoping to outrun the chaos of a life that never fit right. Willow Creek was small, the kind of place where everyone knew your business but pretended they didn't. I liked it that way, until Caleb. He lived next door, in a cedar shingle cabin with a porch that always smelled of wood smoke. Caleb Monroe, 30, was the town's unofficial handyman, fixing roofs, hauling firewood, teaching kids to cast a line. He had a laugh that carried across the lake and eyes that seemed to see through you, like he knew your secrets before you did. We'd been friendly, waves from the driveway, small talk about the weather, but nothing more. Until yesterday, when he'd knocked on my door, fishing rod in hand, and said, "You ever been out on the lake at dawn? Just you and me tomorrow." His voice had a weight I couldn't place, and I'd said yes before I could think. Now, here we were, the air thick with mist and something else I couldn't name. The dock swayed gently under our weight, the only sound the soft lap of water and the occasional chirp of a waking bird. Caleb stood, wiping his hands on his jeans, and handed me a lure. "Thread it like this," he said, his voice low, steady, but his fingers brushed mine for a second too long. My breath caught, and I fumbled the lure, nearly dropping it into the lake. "You're nervous," he said, not a question. His eyes locked on mine, and there was again that glance like he was seeing something I'd spent years hiding. I laughed it off, muttering about being a city boy out of his depth, but my heart was hammering. I wasn't just nervous about fishing. I'd known I was gay since I was 16, sneaking glances at my best friend in gym class, heart racing with a shame I couldn't shake. Chicago had been easier, bars, apps, fleeting connections that didn't ask for more than a night. But Willow Creek, this place was a different world, where pride flags were scarce, and the church on Main Street preached love with a clenched fist. I kept my truth locked tight, buried under polite smiles and vague answers about why I was still single. Caleb, though, he was unraveling me without even trying. "Cast it out," he said, stepping behind me. His hand grazed my shoulder as he adjusted my grip, and I swear I felt it in my bones. I flicked the rod, the line arcing clumsily over the water, and he chuckled, a sound that warmed the chill in the air. "Not bad for a rookie," he said, but his tone carried something softer like pride. Or want. We fished in silence for a while, the lake stretching endless before us, its surface unbroken except for the occasional ripple of a fish. I stole glances at him, his broad shoulders, the way his flannel stretched across his back, the faint scar above his eyebrow that I'd never noticed before. He caught me looking once, and instead of looking away, he held my gaze, his lips twitching into a half-smile that made my stomach flip. "You ever wonder why I asked you out here?" he said suddenly, reeling in his line with slow, deliberate turns. His voice was casual, but his eyes weren't. They were searching, pulling at the edges of something I wasn't ready to face. "Free fishing lessons?" I joked, but my voice cracked, betraying me. He didn't laugh. Instead, he set his rod down and turned to face me fully, the dock creaking under his weight. "Ethan," he said, my name sounding different in his mouth, like a confession. "I've been watching you since you moved here. Not just neighbor stuff. More." My heart stopped. The world narrowed to the space between us, the mist curling around our ankles, the lake holding its breath. I wanted to speak, to deflect, to run, but his eyes held me there, raw and unguarded, like he was offering me something I'd been too scared to ask for. "Caleb, I started, but the words caught in my throat. What could I say? that I'd spent years hiding who I was, that I'd moved here to escape the weight of being seen, only to find him looking at me like this. Before I could finish, a sharp tug on my line jolted me, nearly pulling the rod from my hands. "Got one," Caleb said, his voice bright, but still carrying that undercurrent of something deeper. He stepped closer, guiding my hands to reel in the fish, his chest brushing my back. The fish fought hard, a flash of silver breaking the surface, but all I could feel was him, his warmth, his breath, the way his hands steadied mine. By the time we landed the fish, a small trout, wriggling and defiant, I was shaking, and not from the cold. Caleb unhooked it with practiced ease, his fingers slick with lake water, and released it back into the depths. "First catch," he said, grinning, but his eyes were still on me, still asking questions I didn't know how to answer. The sun was rising now, burning through the mist, and I realized we weren't just fishing. We were standing on the edge of something bigger, something that could change everything. And as Caleb's hand lingered on my arm, I knew I wasn't ready to turn back. We sat on the dock, rods propped against the railing, the morning sun warming the wood beneath us. Caleb pulled 2 thermoses of coffee from his backpack, handing me one with a grin that felt like a secret shared. I took it, my fingers brushing his again, and the jolt was stronger this time, like a current running straight to my core. "You're quiet," he said, sipping his coffee, his eyes scanning the lake like he was giving me space to breathe. I needed it. My head was a mess, torn between the safety of silence and the pull of whatever this was. I'd spent so long building walls. First in Chicago, where being out was easier but still carried a cost, and now here, where every glance felt like a risk. Caleb's words from earlier echoed in my mind. "I've been watching you." More. What did that mean? And why did it make my chest ache like I was waking up for the first time? "I'm just taking it in," I said finally, gesturing vaguely at the lake. It was a weak excuse, but he didn't push. Instead, he leaned back on his elbows, his flannel pulling tight across his chest, and told me about the lake, how he'd learned to fish here as a kid, how his dad used to bring him out before the world woke up. His voice was steady, warm, like a fire you could sit by, but there was a shadow in it, too, something he wasn't saying. "What about you?" he asked, turning to me. "What brought you to Willow Creek? You don't strike me as the small-town type." I laughed, but it came out hollow. "Needed a change," I said, sticking to the script I'd rehearsed for Nosy Neighbors. City got too loud. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the truth either. The truth was messy, a string of failed relationships, a family that didn't know the real me, a life that felt like a suit 2 sizes too small. I'd come here to disappear, to blend into the quiet. But Caleb wasn't letting me. He tilted his head, studying me. "There's more to it," he said softly, not accusing, just knowing. "You don't have to tell me. But I'm here." My throat tightened. I wanted to tell him about the nights I'd spent staring at the ceiling, wondering why I couldn't just be normal, about the way my heart raced when I saw him splitting wood in his yard, shirtless and unaware of my gaze. But the words wouldn't come. Not yet. Instead, I changed the subject. "You ever catch anything big out here?" I asked, nodding at the lake. He grinned, the tension easing for a moment. "Once, a bass bigger than my arm. Fought like hell." He launched into the story, his hands animating the struggle, and I let myself get lost in the way his eyes lit up, in the way he seemed to fill the space around him with life. For a moment, I forgot to be afraid. We fished for another hour, the conversation lighter now. Stories about his childhood, my disastrous attempts at gardening, the time he'd fixed Mrs. Larson's roof in a thunderstorm. But every so often his gaze would linger, and I'd feel it again, that pull like a hook caught in my chest. I wasn't imagining it. He was waiting for something, and I was starting to think I knew what. By noon, the sun was high, and the fish weren't biting anymore. Caleb suggested we take the boat out to the middle of the lake, where the water was deeper and the fish might be hungrier. I hesitated. I'd never been great with boats, and the idea of being out there, alone with him, felt like stepping off a cliff. but his smile was disarming, and I found myself nodding. The boat was small, a weathered rowboat with peeling green paint, but Caleb handled it with ease, his arms flexing as he rowed us out. I sat across from him, clutching the sides, trying not to stare at the way the sunlight caught the stubble on his jaw. The lake stretched around us, vast and quiet, the shore a distant line of trees. It felt like we were the only two people in the world. "Ever think about leaving Willow Creek?" I asked, needing to fill the silence. He paused, resting the oars. "Thought about it. Even packed a bag once after high school. But this place, it's home. Flaws and all." His eyes darkened, and I wondered what flaws he meant. The town's small-mindedness? Or something closer, something personal? "What stopped you?" I asked. He looked at me, his expression unreadable. Didn't have a reason to stay, but I didn't have a reason to go either. Not till recently. My pulse quickened. I opened my mouth to ask what he meant, but he leaned forward, his voice dropping. "Ethan, I need to tell you something. Before we go back." The boat rocked gently, the water lapping against the sides. My heart was in my throat, and I knew whatever he said next would change everything. I nodded, unable to speak, and waited for the words that would either break me or set me free. The boat drifted, caught in the lake's gentle sway, and Caleb's eyes held mine like they were anchoring me in place. "I'm not good at this," he started, his voice rougher than usual, like he was pulling the words from somewhere deep. "But I've been carrying this for a while, and out here with you, it feels like the right time." I couldn't breathe. The air was thick with the scent of pine and water, but all I could focus on was him, his calloused hands gripping the oars, the way his jaw tightened like he was bracing for a fight. I wanted to tell him to stop, to keep it light, to not say something that would make this moment too real. But I didn't. I couldn't. "I'm gay," he said, the words landing like a stone in the still water. "Always have been. Kept it quiet, 'cause Willow Creek isn't exactly waving rainbow flags. But you make me want to stop hiding." My heart lurched. I'd suspected, hoped maybe, but hearing it out loud was like a dam breaking. Caleb, the guy who'd fixed my leaky sink last month, who'd waved at me every morning like clockwork, was laying himself bare. And he was looking at me like I was the reason he'd found the courage. "I don't know what you're thinking," he continued, his voice softer now, almost pleading. "And I don't expect anything. But I've seen the way you look at me, Ethan. I know I'm not imagining it." He wasn't. God, he wasn't. I'd spent months convincing myself those stolen glances were nothing, that the way my pulse raced when he smiled was just my imagination. But now, with the lake stretching endless around us, there was no hiding. Not from him. Not from myself. I started, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm gay too." The words felt foreign, like they belonged to someone braver. I never said them out loud. Not like this, not to someone who mattered. My hands shook, and I gripped the edge of the boat to steady myself. Caleb's face softened, a slow smile breaking through the tension. "I figured," he said, not smug, just relieved. "But hearing you say it, it's different." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy with possibility, with the weight of truths we'd both been carrying too long. I wanted to ask him everything. When he'd known, how he'd survived in a town like this, what he meant when he said I made him want to stop hiding. But before I could, he reached across the boat, his hand finding mine. His touch was warm, grounding, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was running. We didn't speak for a while, just sat there, hands clasped, the boat drifting aimlessly. The lake was alive around us, fish darting beneath the surface, a heron gliding low in the distance. But it felt like we were in a bubble, separate from the world. I thought about Chicago, about the men I'd met in dimly lit bars, the ones who'd wanted nothing more than a moment. This was different. This was real. Eventually, Caleb picked up the oars again, rowing us toward a small cove where the trees leaned over the water like they were listening. "There's a spot here," he said, his voice lighter now. "Best place for catfish. You up for it?" I nodded, grateful for the shift back to something tangible. We baited our hooks, cast our lines, and settled into an easy rhythm. But the air was different now, charged with what we'd said and what we hadn't. Every brush of his shoulder against mine, every shared laugh, felt like a promise. As the afternoon wore on, he told me more about growing up in Willow Creek, about the whispers he'd overheard in church, about the night he'd almost left for good but stayed because his mom got sick. I told him about Chicago, about the freedom that came with strings, about the family I hadn't spoken to in years because I couldn't face their disappointment. It was like we were trading pieces of ourselves, each story a step closer to something neither of us could name yet. By the time the sun began to dip, painting the sky in shades of fire, we'd caught 3 fish, 2 catfish and another trout. Caleb insisted we release them, saying the lake deserved to keep its own. I watched him unhook the last one, his hands steady and sure, and felt a pang of something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. "We should head back," he said, but he didn't move, his eyes on me again. "Unless you want to stay out here a little longer." I didn't want to go back. Not to the shore, not to Willow Creek, not to the version of myself that hid behind closed doors. But the world was waiting, and I knew we couldn't stay in this bubble forever. "A little longer," I said, my voice steady for the first time all day. He smiled, and we sat there as the sky burned out, the lake reflecting the last of the light. I didn't know what came next, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid to find out. The boat rocked gently as we drifted in the cove, the sky now a deep indigo, stars beginning to prick through the dusk. Caleb's hand rested near mine on the boat's edge, close enough that I could feel the warmth of his skin without touching. My confession still hung in the air, raw and fragile, but his presence made it feel safe, like a secret the lake would keep for us. "You ever feel like you're living someone else's life?" I asked, breaking the silence. My voice was soft, almost lost in the evening breeze. I wasn't sure why I said it. Maybe because the lake felt like a confessional, or maybe because Caleb's honesty had cracked something open in me. He turned to me, his eyes catching the last of the light. "All the time," he said. "Growing up here, you learn to wear a mask, smile at the right people, say the right things. But it's like you're acting in a play you didn't audition for." I nodded, my chest tight. I knew that feeling. Every family dinner where I'd dodged questions about girlfriends, every time I'd laughed off a coworker's joke to fit in. "How do you do it?" I asked. "Stay here, I mean," knowing that I trailed off, not wanting to say it. "Judge me? Hate me?" He finished for me, his voice steady but laced with something bitter. "You get used to it, or you don't. But I've got my mom, my sister. They know, and they're okay with it. That's enough to keep me grounded. For now." I wanted to ask more about his family, about how he'd found the courage to tell them, but the words felt too heavy. Instead, I shifted closer, my knee brushing his. He didn't pull away, and that small act felt like a victory. We rowed back to the dock as the first stars appeared, the air cooler now, sharp with the scent of pine. Caleb tied the boat with practiced ease, and we gathered our gear in silence. The weight of the day settled over me. Not heavy, but full, like I'd been carrying something I hadn't realized was so light. "Want to grab a beer at my place?" he asked as we stepped onto the shore, his voice casual, but his eyes searching. "Got a fire pit out back. Could keep the night going." My heart skipped. It was a simple offer, but it felt like more like a door opening, one I could walk through or turn away from. "Yeah," I said, surprising myself with how easy it came out. "Sound good." His cabin was a short walk through the trees, the path lit by moonlight. Inside, it was warm, cluttered with tools and books, a quilt thrown over the couch like an afterthought. He grabbed 2 beers from the fridge, and we stepped out to the backyard, where a fire pit waited, already stacked with logs. He lit it with a flick of a match, and soon the flames were crackling, casting shadows across his face. We sat on mismatched chairs, the fire warming our legs, and talked, really talked. He told me about the first time he'd kissed a boy, at 17, behind the high school gym, both of them terrified of being caught. I told him about my first crush, a barista in Chicago who'd never known how many extra coffees I'd bought just to see him smile. We laughed, and it felt like we were rewriting the rules of the world just for tonight. But as the fire burned low, the conversation turned heavier. "You ever think about leaving?" he asked, echoing my earlier question. "Finding a place where you don't have to hide." I stared into the flames, the question cutting deeper than I expected. I thought Willow Creek was that place, I admitted. Not for being out, but for being invisible. I thought I could just exist here, you know? No questions, no expectations. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "But you don't want to be invisible, Ethan." "Not really." He was right, and it hurt. I'd spent so long shrinking myself down, making myself small enough to fit into other people's lives. But sitting here, with Caleb's eyes on me, I wanted to be seen. I wanted to be enough. "I don't know how to do this," I said, my voice barely audible over the crackle of the fire. "Be out here. Be us." He reached across the space between us, his hand finding mine again. "You don't have to know," he said. "Not yet, but I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." The firelight danced in his eyes, and for a moment, I let myself believe it could be that simple. But as we sat there, hands intertwined, the sound of a car pulling into his driveway broke the spell. Headlights cut through the dark, and Caleb tensed, his grip tightening for a fraction of a second before he let go. "Stay here," he said, standing. "It's probably nothing." But the way he moved, quick, guarded, told me it wasn't nothing. And as I watched him disappear around the side of the house, my stomach twisted with a fear I couldn't name. The fire crackled, but the warmth couldn't touch the chill creeping up my spine. I sat frozen, staring at the spot where Caleb had disappeared, the sound of voices, low, tense, drifting from the front of the house. My mind raced. Who was it? A neighbor? Someone from town? And why did Caleb's shoulders stiffen like he was bracing for a fight? I stood, hesitating, then crept toward the side of the house, staying in the shadows. The voices grew clearer, Caleb's steady but sharp, and another, gruffer, unfamiliar. I peered around the corner and saw a man in a flannel jacket, his face half lit by the porch light. He was older, maybe 50, with a scowl that seemed carved into his features. "You think you can just do whatever you want," the man was saying, his voice low but venomous. "People talk, Caleb. They see things." Caleb crossed his arms, his posture defiant. "Let them talk, Ray. I'm not hiding anymore." My heart sank. Ray. I'd heard the name before. Ray Thornton, a local mechanic with a reputation for running his mouth at the town's only bar. I'd seen him at the gas station once, glaring at me like I'd stolen something. Now, he was here, and the way he looked at Caleb made my skin crawl. "You're making a mistake," Ray said, stepping closer. "This ain't the city. You bring that kind of trouble here. It's not just you who pays." Caleb didn't flinch. "Go home, Ray. This doesn't concern you." Ray's eyes flicked toward the backyard, and I ducked back, my pulse pounding. I didn't know if he'd seen me, but the threat in his voice was clear. This wasn't just gossip. This was a warning. I slipped back to the fire pit, my hands shaking as I sank into the chair. Caleb returned a minute later, his face tight, his eyes scanning me like he was checking for damage. "You okay?" he asked, sitting across from me. "Who was that?" I asked, my voice sharper than I meant it to be. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Ray Thornton. He's got opinions about how people should live. Heard some rumors, I guess. Doesn't matter." "It does matter," I said, leaning forward. "What did he mean? Trouble?" "Caleb, what's going on?" He looked at me, his expression torn between anger and something softer, something that looked like fear. "Willow Creek's small, Ethan. People notice things. Me, you, spending time together. It's not invisible. Ray's just the loudest one so far." I felt sick. I'd known this place wasn't exactly progressive, but I'd thought I could keep my head down, stay safe. Now, with Caleb's confession and Ray's words ringing in my ears, I realized how naive I'd been. "What do we do?" I asked, hating how small my voice sounded. Caleb reached for my hand again, his grip firm. We don't let people like Ray decide who we are. But we need to be careful. At least for now. Careful. The word felt like a cage. I wanted to argue, to say we shouldn't have to hide, but the reality of Willow Creek was sinking in. I'd seen the looks at the grocery store, heard the whispers at the diner. This wasn't Chicago, where I could blend into a crowd. This was a town where secrets had a way of turning into weapons. We sat in silence, the fire dying down to embers. Caleb's hand stayed in mine, a lifeline in the dark, but the weight of Ray's visit lingered. I thought about my old life, the one I'd left behind, and wondered if I'd traded one kind of fear for another. "Let's go inside," Caleb said finally, standing. "It's getting cold." Inside, he poured us another beer, but the mood had shifted. We sat on his couch, closer than before, our knees touching. He told me about Ray, how he'd been a friend of Caleb's dad, how he'd always had a chip on his shoulder, how he'd made trouble for others in town who didn't fit his idea of normal. I listened, my anger growing, but so did my fear. What if Ray wasn't alone? What if this was just the beginning? "I'm not scared of him," Caleb said, as if reading my thoughts. "But I'm scared of what this could do to you. You're new here. You don't deserve to deal with this." "I'm not running," I said, surprising myself with the conviction in my voice. "Not this time." He looked at me, his eyes softening. "Good," he said, and then, before I could think, he leaned in and kissed me. It was soft at first, tentative, like he was giving me a chance to pull away. But I didn't. I kissed him back, my hands finding his shoulders, the world narrowing to the warmth of his lips, the roughness of his stubble. It was like the lake all over again, a moment where nothing else existed, where I could finally be myself. When we pulled apart, breathless, he rested his forehead against mine. "I want to do that for a long time," he whispered. "Me too," I said, and for the first time, I meant it without fear. But as we sat there, wrapped in each other, I couldn't shake the feeling that Ray's visit was a storm cloud on the horizon. And I knew, deep down, that this wasn't the end of it. The next morning, I woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Caleb humming in his kitchen. I'd stayed the night, curled up on his couch under that quilt, too shaken by Ray's visit, and that kiss, to go back to my empty house. Caleb had insisted I stay, his voice gentle but firm, and I hadn't argued. Now, sunlight streamed through his windows, and the memory of his lips on mine felt like a dream I wasn't ready to wake from. "Morning," he said, handing me a mug as I shuffled into the kitchen. His smile was warm, but there was a shadow in his eyes, like he'd been up thinking about Ray too. "Morning," I mumbled, taking the coffee. Our fingers brushed, and that spark was still there, undeniable. But so was the weight of last night. "What now?" I asked, not sure if I meant us or the trouble Ray represented. Caleb leaned against the counter, his expression serious. "We keep going," he said. "We live our lives. Ray doesn't get to decide what we do." I wanted to believe him, but the fear was still there, coiled tight in my chest. I'd spent so long hiding, and now, with Caleb, I was stepping into the open. It was exhilarating, but it was also terrifying. "What if he talks?" I asked. "What if others?" "Let them," Caleb said, his voice firm. "I'm done playing by their rules, and you shouldn't have to either." His words were a lifeline, but they didn't erase the reality of Willow Creek. We spent the morning talking, planning, nothing concrete, just promises to stick together, to face whatever came. But as I walked back to my house, the sunlight felt less comforting, like it was exposing me to the world. The next few days were a blur of stolen moments and quiet fears. Caleb and I met at the lake again, fished, talked, laughed. We kissed under the trees, hidden from view, each touch a rebellion against the town's watchful eyes. But the whispers were starting. At the diner, Mrs. Larson's smile was tighter than usual. At the gas station, a group of men fell silent when I walked in. I told myself I was imagining it, but Caleb's grim expression when we met later told me I wasn't. "They're talking," he said, tossing a pebble into the lake. "Ray's been at the bar, running his mouth. Says he saw us together." My stomach dropped. What do we do? Caleb took my hand, his grip steady. We don't hide. Not anymore. His courage was infectious, but it didn't stop the dread. That night, I found a note slipped under my door. Watch yourself, city boy. No signature, but I knew who it was from. I showed it to Caleb, and his face darkened, but he didn't waver. We're stronger than this, he said, pulling me close. Together. The next day, we decided to face the town head-on. Caleb suggested we go to the weekly farmers market, not as neighbors, but as us, holding hands, letting the world see. It was a risk, but I was tired of running. We walked through the stalls, his fingers laced with mine, and I felt every eye on us. Some smiled. Old Mrs. Carter, who sold jam, gave us a knowing nod. Others, like Ray, who stood by the beer tent, glared with a hatred that made my skin crawl. By evening, the tension was unbearable. We sat by Caleb's fire pit again, the air heavy with the weight of what we'd done. This is just the start, he said, his voice low. It's going to get harder before it gets easier. I nodded, my throat tight. I wanted to be brave, to match his strength, but the note, the stares, Ray's voice, they were all there, gnawing at me. I don't know if I'm ready for this, I admitted. Caleb turned to me, his eyes fierce. You are. You're here with me. That's enough. He kissed me again, harder this time, like he was pouring his courage into me. And for a moment, I believed I could do this, face the town, face the world, face myself. But as we pulled apart, a crash from the front of the house shattered the moment. Glass breaking, voices shouting. Caleb was on his feet in an instant, and I follow, my heart pounding. Ray stood in the driveway, a brick in his hand, Caleb's truck window smashed. Two other men were with him, their faces shadowed, but their intent clear. You think you can flaunt that shit here? Ray spat, his voice slurred with alcohol. This is our town. Caleb stepped forward, his fists clenched. Get off my property, Ray. Now. I grabbed his arm, fear choking me. Caleb, don't. But it was too late. Ray swung, and the night exploded into chaos. The air was thick with rage and the sharp tang of broken glass. Caleb dodged Ray's swing, his movements quick but controlled, like he'd been ready for this. I stumbled back, my heart hammering, as one of Ray's buddies lunged forward, grabbing Caleb's arm. Stop it, I shouted, my voice cracking, but they didn't hear me or didn't care. Caleb twisted free, shoving the man back with a force that sent him sprawling. Ray swung again, wild and sloppy, and Caleb caught his wrist, pinning against the truck. Enough, Caleb growled, his voice low but deadly. The third man hesitated, his eyes darting between us, and I saw my chance. I grabbed a shovel leaning against the porch and held it up, not sure if I could swing it, but hoping I looked convincing. Get out, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Now. Ray's eyes locked on mine, his sneer twisting into something uglier. You're going to regret this, city boy, he spat, but he stepped back, his buddies following. They retreated to their truck, tires screeching as they peeled out, leaving the night eerily quiet. Caleb's shoulders slumped, his breath ragged. Blood trickled from a cut on his cheek where a shard of glass must have grazed him. I dropped the shovel and rushed to him, my hands shaking as I touched his face. You okay? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He nodded, but his eyes were distant, like he was seeing something beyond the driveway. I'm sorry, he said. I didn't think it had come to this. It's not your fault, I said, but the words felt hollow. The broken window, the note, the fight, it was all because of us, because we dared to be something the town didn't want. I pulled him inside, grabbing a cloth to clean the cut, my hand still trembling. He sat on the couch, letting me dab at the blood, his silence heavier than I'd ever felt it. We can't stay here, I said finally, the truth spilling out before I could stop it. Not like this. Caleb looked at me, his eyes searching. You want to leave? I didn't know. Willow Creek was supposed to be my escape, but now it felt like a trap. Yet leaving meant running again, and I was so tired of running. I don't know, I admit it, but I don't want to lose this. Us. He reached for my hand, his grip warm and sure. Then we fight for it, he said. Not with fists, with who we are. We don't let them win. The next morning, we went to the sheriff's office. Caleb's mom, a fierce woman with gray streaks in her hair, came with us, her presence a quiet strength. The sheriff, an older man named Hargrove, listened as we told him about Ray, the note, the truck. His face was unreadable, but he took our statement and promised to look into it. I didn't know if he would, but it was a start. Word spread fast. By afternoon, the town was buzzing, not just with Ray's actions, but with us. Caleb and I, holding hands at the market, kissing by the lake. Some turned away, their disapproval loud in their silence. But others, Mrs. Carter, the librarian, a few kids from Caleb's fishing lessons, came to us, offering quiet support. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep going. We spent the next weeks rebuilding. Caleb fixed his truck window, and I helped, our hands working together like they belonged. We went back to the lake, fished, laughed, kissed under the stars. Each moment was a defiance, a promise that we wouldn't break. Ray and his buddies kept their distance, but I knew they weren't gone. Not yet. One evening, as we sat by the fire pit, Caleb turned to me, his eyes soft but fierce. "I love you," he said, the words simple but heavy, like they'd been waiting years to be spoken. I froze, my heart swelling until it hurt. "I love you too," I said, and it was true, truer than anything I'd ever said. We kissed, the fire warming our faces, and for the first time, I felt like I was home. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Willow Creek wasn't going to change overnight, and neither would the world. But as I looked at Caleb, his hand in mine, I knew we'd face it together. We'd fight, we'd love, we'd live, not in the shadows, but in the open, where we belonged. And that glance he'd given me on the dock, the one that started it all, it wasn't just a glance. It was a beginning.